everyone, I'm Ian McCarthy of Lifting for Life, and today I would like to follow up on my last video on the topic of whether or not an energy surplus is required to gain muscle, and I'd like to talk to you about why it is people lose muscle when they cut. Now, my original intent was just to keep this a discussion of the mechanisms, but I realized that might not be actionable. You might not be able to actually do anything with that in practice. So what I'd like to do at the end of this video is talk about how this understanding of mechanisms can then be used to try to decrease either the likelihood of muscle loss when cutting or the degree of muscle loss which does occur. So I think there are a number of different ways in which this can happen, and I'd like to talk about three, two of which I think are practically completely uncontroversial, and one which is a little more speculative, but which I find very plausible. And then I encourage you to think critically about what I talk about and make up your own mind ultimately. So let's start with a very basic fact. If you are cutting, you're almost certainly going to be in an energy deficit. And in thinking about this topic and preparing for this video a little bit, I tried to come up with scenarios in which you could be cutting and not in an energy deficit, and I couldn't come up with any. Interestingly, even if for every pound of fat you lose, you replace exactly with 1 pound of muscle, you still must be in an energy, well, assuming no other tissues change, by the way, you still have to be in an energy deficit because fat is much more energy dense than muscle. So your body weight could not change while you are in a deficit. Now, if, say, your muscle mass is staying the same and you're losing a pound of fat every week, which I think is a much more likely scenario, you're definitely in an energy deficit. So let's say it's practically guaranteed. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that the total energy value of your body, as weird as that phrase sounds, has to go down. That is the way energy works in the universe in which we live. You can't, have the body and ingest 2,500 calories a day and expend 3,000, and the total energy value of your body not go down by 500 calories. It is that would contradict thermodynamics. So that means that energy deficit has to come from something, right? Like your whole body energy value goes down. And that doesn't tell us where it comes from. It has to be there. So if you're in a daily energy deficit, whether it be 100 calories or 500 or 1,000, you still have to account for that. So the overwhelming majority of the time, our preference is that energy is accounted for with a decrease in body fat mass. In that, you have body fat, it gets broken down, and then it gets used as an energy source. And when you look at energy ingested, and then energy expended, and then the change in body mass, everything, really body energy, everything adds up. Now, as you get leaner, the total amount of body fat that you have to use as this energy source to break down and use for energy, given you are expending more energy than you're consuming through food, that all of your body fat as an energy supply decreases. So the likelihood, or perhaps a better way to put it would be the degree to which muscle protein gets broken down to then be used as an energy source increases, because again, you simply have less body fat. So this would be an explanation of why, as you get leaner, this likelihood increases, or if you're already losing muscle, you can lose more muscle when getting leaner. And I'm kind of struggling to talk about this because we need to be very precise about our language, because this isn't guaranteed. You could indeed have someone who's quite lean who gets leaner and gains muscle. It isn't impossible. So it's an issue of likelihood in a lot of these cases, or, one outcome and then that outcome occurring to a greater degree, things like this. So that is the first reason. And that's why, to use some examples, if you have a very severely obese person, I was actually just doing an Instagram live Q&A, and one of the things that came up is that there are case studies of morbidly obese people literally fasting for an entire year. And one case study I'm thinking of in particular, to my knowledge, there were no negative health outcomes. Now, unfortunately, I don't recall off the top of my head, and I didn't think to pull this up prior to this video. I don't recall the change in lean body mass, but body fat is protective of muscle simply because it provides energy. It is an energy source. So if you have a massive amount of energy available as body fat, then that is protective of your muscle mass. So that's one extreme. That's why, or at least one reason why, we can be extremely aggressive with those who are fatter. Whereas the very lean person, where they're really, it's just a matter of like mitigating the muscle loss that's going to happen, we want to be much more conservative. So that alone can cause muscle loss. But another issue, and that's very mechanistic, you notice, another issue is that of training performance. As you eat less, your work capacity, so what it is you're able to do in the gym, can go down. I don't want to just say it does go down linearly, because in my experience, it actually doesn't really work like that. Like energy intake or energy balance, I should say, can vary significantly and not have a significant effect on work capacity. But when you get to the extremes, that's where we can see big changes. And again, that would become worse as someone becomes more and more dieted down. So again, work capacity is going to go down and recovery capacity is going to go down, in that you are ingesting less food. You're going to have less energy coming in to then be used to recover from what it is you're doing. So decreased work capacity and decreased recovery capacity means, unless you are to simply attempt to push through it and then exceed your recovery capacity, which is then going to result in your performance decreasing even more, the total amount of work you do in the gym is going to go down. And that is the stimulus for muscle growth. I discussed this extensively in my last video. So what you have when you combine these two issues is a decrease in the stimulus, like the stimulus that you generate in the gym is less. Then the total muscle protein breakdown, which is one component of muscle protein balance, is increasing. So if we want to put this very simply, the increases in muscle protein synthesis that you're getting from training are probably diminishing. And muscle protein breakdown, which is something that you desire to mitigate at least to some extent, and there's some nuance here about whether that's advantageous. Perhaps we actually don't want to worry about that. It's a process that we want to be happening. We want to maximize muscle protein synthesis. But I think it would be reasonable to say that we desire to mitigate excessive or increased muscle protein breakdown. But if we have the degree to which muscle protein synthesis is increased from training is less, and the amount of muscle protein getting broken down is increased, the result is lower muscle protein balance. Now, that might still be positive. In other words, you might still be able to gain muscle in that scenario. It's certainly possible, but you might be gaining less. You might go from gaining some muscle to simply maintaining your muscle mass, and very often you go from gaining or maintaining your muscle mass to losing muscle. Because if we talk about losing muscle at the level of the body, something you can actually notice, that would be a function of sustained negative muscle protein balance. Just as, if you notice that you had $10,000 and you no longer have it, that could be a function of You consistently spent, $2 more than you had, and you just did it for so long that finally you notice, hey, I don't have $10,000. So those are the 2 points which I think are more or less wholly uncontroversial. I do think folks might disagree with, is the word probable appropriate, or is it plausible? Is likelihood the right word, etc. But I think the big picture analysis is correct there. Now, to get a little bit more into speculation, and I might be even downplaying it a bit, but I just want to, it's very important to me that I avoid overstating the situation. Something I mentioned is in eating less, you have less energy available for recovery. I think that if dieting means you're ingesting less food in the anabolic window, the period after training in which muscle protein synthesis is elevated, or to put it perhaps more precisely, maximum muscle protein balance is higher. If you're ingesting less food in that period, first of all, we have to think about protein. I talked about this once again extensively in my last video. But consuming appropriate protein is, at least in the evidence-based community and even the bro bodybuilding community, in fact, they probably overconsume protein very often. I think this is rarely an issue. But if the total energy that you consume in that period is less, then I think that could plausibly decrease the amount of muscle that you build after training, because there's less energy to be used as a fuel source to drive muscle protein synthesis. Now, notice that this is actually separate from the stimulus, right? So if your training volume is going down, or we could even put that aside and just say, if the overall hypertrophic stimulus that you're able to generate in the gym is going down, okay, that's going to have a negative effect. But if you follow that up with providing less energy to fuel synthesizing muscle, then that worsens the situation. And you're then combining that with increased muscle protein breakdown, because muscle protein is being broken down just as an energy source. And this is a really bad situation. This is, very much undesirable, and as is anecdotally very obvious, can generate, outcomes that are really unsatisfying. So that's the mechanistic discussion. And to speak to how one might mitigate this in practice, at the very least, lose less muscle. Because I think something that's actually, just to kind of ramble here for a moment, I think it's actually really common for naturals to cut and get really stringy. And they might actually look decent bulked, and then they just clearly lose a lot of muscle cutting. Oftentimes folks will have less muscle than they think to begin with, but just clear muscle loss. And I'm not sure if I personally have been there, but that's just something that I really want to help people avoid. So I think the obvious solution, one thing is, of course, ensuring that you're consuming enough protein. But again, I think that's rarely an issue. But remember, the reason why that muscle protein is getting broken down is because you're in a deficit, and in some sense you are running out of body fat to be used as an energy source. Okay, so that energy is coming from muscle protein. Well, if you diet more slowly, in other words, the deficit you create is smaller, then I think that will probably be less of an issue. Less muscle protein is going to get broken down. Additionally, if you diet more slowly, you have more food, and I think your performance will probably be better. You'll probably be able to do more in the gym. You will then probably be able to recover from more in the gym. And this gets a little bit into nutrient timing, but assuming that that food that you wouldn't be eating if you were dieting more aggressively ends up in your anabolic window, you then have more energy which can be directed toward synthesizing muscle protein. So I think this is a really good argument. Indeed, I'm not sure it's even just one argument. We have multiple different reasons that lead to the conclusion of you probably want to diet slowly. Now, I think there are scenarios in which it's appropriate to diet more quickly, but that's where the general recommendation of, yeah, the guy who's using whatever, I don't even really know anything about drugs, but a lot of drugs, hey, maybe they go from off-season shape to shredded in 12 weeks, off-season shape to shredded in 16 weeks, and they even get bigger in that time. But this is where these longer, to use an example, this is where these longer contest preps come from. Like, this is a mechanistic explanation of why it makes sense to do that. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I really enjoyed talking to myself about this, talking to you about this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I've really enjoyed both this video and the last video I did. I would be more than happy to continue getting into topics like this alongside the vlogs, which I know probably appeal to people who find stuff like this potentially extremely boring. So thank you again. If you found the video informative, please do hit the like button. I would encourage you to share it with anyone who you think might be misinformed or would benefit from the video. And I will see you again soon. Thanks so much.